Morning, everyone. It's really nice to see you on this sunny in Glasgow day for our straight after the spring break for many, I think. Uh, I'm just very quickly going to hand over to Matthew Ketteringham, who's the BALEAP TEEP officer. He's also a lecturer at University of Leeds. And Matthew's agreed to do a talk today on the BALEAP individual accreditation scheme on presenting evidence and demonstrating impact. There are two deadlines for the TEEP portfolio every year. It's the end of June. So if you've got a body of work ready, this will help you do the final polishing up for June, or maybe get you ready to start thinking about what you need for November or indeed the next year. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Matthew. Thank you very much, Matthew, for joining us today.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Carol, and the rest of the teacher education in EAP for inviting me today. I'll just share my screen. Fingers crossed everything goes to plan. Okay. So hopefully you can see everything. Is that okay? Can you see? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So today we're just talking about presenting evidence, presenting, evidencing, and demonstrating impact in your RAP. But also, the things we'll talk about today are obviously applicable also to the case study. This is my first outing as BALEAP TEEP officer, so please be gentle. We'll see how, and hopefully I can answer a few questions as they arise as we go on today. So the session aim, we're just going to discuss how you may link evidence to selected criteria, particularly focusing on demonstrating impact. We should hopefully have a little bit of time to explore selected criteria in detail, and hopefully this will equip you to be able to link strong, credible evidence within your RAP and case study. So today I'll just briefly talk about the different pathways, and then we'll have a little activity where you can look at an excerpt from each pathway, and we can talk about the evidence that they are provided and what impact that supports. So I guess if you're here today, we won't talk about it too much, but if you're here today, what is TEEP accreditation? You most likely know. So it's a reflective, developmental, and collaborative exploration of your EA practice. So it's a great tool to evaluate and see how you're developing as an EAP practitioner, whatever stage you are in your career. So it's a submission of a written claim of competence, or RAP, accompanied by a portfolio of evidence, and it's recognition of your competence and knowledge as an EAP practitioner. Often people ask how it is different to HEA accreditation. So it is an accreditation, a professional accreditation. The key aspect or the key difference between the two, this is particularly focused on EAP competencies rather than teaching in higher education. And a key aspect is there's a portfolio of evidence and also the teaching observations. So that clearly defines the scheme with regards to HEA accreditation. So why would you undertake TEEP accreditation? So as I said, it's good to reflect and evaluate where you are within your EAP career. It demonstrates your commitment to the field. It particularly shows your knowledge and competence as an EAP practitioner. And I guess you might have started to notice if you're applying for pre-sessionals, EAP employment, you do actually start to see this as perhaps a desirable on a job specification. And I guess also it's becoming increasingly important with developments in higher education, particularly in the UK, with language centres at risk. And I think it's very important that we as EAP practitioners can articulate what we do, why we do it, and particularly what impact we are having on students, colleagues, programs, and also institutions. So just very briefly, so the criteria is based around the three BALEAP core values. So professionalism, development, collaboration, and inclusivity. Apologies. And each the knowledge and activities are linked to the four areas of EAP practice. So planning and design, teaching and learning, scholarship and development, and assessment and feedback. We'll talk a little bit more about the RAP later, but this is often one way that you can begin to think about structuring your RAP, perhaps particularly at the associate fellow and fellow level. This is a common way that we see that the RAP is structured with a clear heading for each particular area. So which level is most appropriate for you? So thinking about the associate fellow, so you're teaching EAP effectively, you might be relatively new to EAP, or you're currently working and you perhaps don't have too much autonomy with the materials that you teach. So the main area of impact for associate fellow would be thinking about impact on students. For the fellow level, we're thinking about EAP practitioners that regularly contribute to course or program development and are beginning to further engage with EAP scholarship and supporting colleagues' practice. So here we're thinking about impact on students as well, but also beyond your own teaching. So thinking about your impact perhaps on colleagues, different courses, different programs, or perhaps on the EAP sector. And then finally, thinking about the senior fellow, you're in a leadership role, so you'd have significant influence over EAP provision. Also, you might mentor and support others, shape policy or curriculum. So here, the key aspect, it would still be students and colleagues, but where is the impact on the institution and beyond? That could come through leadership in teaching, mentoring, or scholarship. Just very briefly about the tasks, as you're probably aware. So depending on the level that you wish to follow, so the associate fellow includes a 1,500 word RAP. There isn't a case study within the associate fellow, but you're expected to have 2 teaching observations and 1 referee statement. Regarding the teaching observations, these need to be conducted within the past 3 years, so relatively recent. Thinking about the fellow, the RAP is 3,000 to 3,500 words. This time, 1 case study, so 1 particular aspect of your teaching, and then 2 observations and 2 referee statements. And finally, the senior fellow is a larger piece of work with 6,000 to 6,500 words, 2 case studies within the application, and again, 2 observations and referee statements. As Carol mentioned, we're coming up to the next submission date, so it's the end of June and the end of November each year, and you should submit via the BALEAP website. There's just a note about the fees. Interestingly, there's a slight reduction if you are following through the system. So if you go from associate fellow to fellow, there's a slight reduced rate. I think originally when the scheme was designed, it was seen as you would follow from associate fellow to senior fellow, but you can apply for any level you wish depending on which suits your particular context. Before we have a little look at some RAPs, just very briefly, thinking of your application or your current stage, what are perhaps some barriers or difficulties to completing BALEAP accreditation? You could drop them in to the chat box or raise your hand. What are some difficulties you might be having at the minute, or any particular barriers to completing BALEAP accreditation? I'll stop sharing. See if anyone's got their hand up. Yeah, I can see Faith.
Hi there. I thought I'd get the ball rolling
Excellent.
with probably not a ununique question. That's a clumsy way of wording it. I think one of the things that I struggle with in terms of conceptualizing both the BALEAP and the HEA one is thinking about how I've impacted and how to evidence, whether for the fellowship or for the senior fellowship, showing, I suppose, the hopefully positive impact that I've had.
Yeah. I think that's quite a common issue. I think today we'll look at a few examples of how you're showing your evidence is valid, and then how that demonstrates your impact. So how the two interconnect. But yeah, that's a great point. I think that's perhaps the hardest part, and it's perhaps the the most common issue that perhaps we see when applications are perhaps referred. Yeah, is that link? Is there a clear link between the competency and the evidence, and how that is demonstrating impact? Yeah, I think it's the most difficult aspect, I think, of completing the RAP. Hopefully, with a few examples today, we'll hopefully it'll clarify a few issues. Hopefully.
There are also now quite a few questions in the chat for you, Matthew.
Okay, so we'll have a little look. So a lot around time limitations, so compiling and organizing evidence. Excellent. So yeah, we'll talk about that today. Time considerations around young family. Interesting. Yeah, keeping within the word count. Interestingly, for the word count, perhaps the associate fellow is one of the most difficult to keep within the word count that I've seen. It's quite difficult. Obviously, you've got to be quite concise. It's only 1,500 words. And then organizing observations. That's a great question, Jennifer, regarding observations. So there's a number of different approaches. So one of the observations needs to be conducted by a BALEAP observer, but there are availabilities perhaps to be recorded or a blind observation. So that's really useful. If you're having difficulty, actually, feel free to contact me, and I'll put my email at the end. Andrea. Okay, so quite interesting. Yeah, regards evidence for portfolios can be difficult. Obviously, that can come from a number of years. The past few years is totally fine. And we'll talk perhaps briefly about how you can show competencies with regards to if you might not have much autonomy of changing materials, designing courses. We'll also show how you can show competency through how you explain things in the RAP. And then finally, let's look at one more. Okay, yeah, so linking evidence to which particular category. Excellent. Okay, so hopefully today we'll be able to clear up a few of these issues by looking at a couple of examples. So that's the next task.